ever buy cheap parts and have to replace them again and again? That's happened to me, and here's how spending a little bit more money has actually saved me a lot of money in the long run. If you've been working on cars for any length of time, you know the importance of buy once, cry once. That's a lesson I've had to learn over and over. I had a transmission rebuild from the go-to guy really bite me in a big way. I've had a starter leave me stranded not once, not twice, but 5 times, and I've had more fiddly little things go bad than I can shake a stick at. Here's how I overcame them so that way you don't have to make the same mistakes that I did. As with anyone who's had the speed bug bite, when you start stepping up the power level, some of those parts, like stockish transmissions, tend to be the next weak link. It's no surprise that the very stock Turbo 350 that was in the car broke when I put that big torque 383 in front of it. When it started to slip and show a huge amount of glitter in the transmission pan, at the time I had like absolutely no budget. New family, all those things. I wound up asking around, and everyone says, oh yeah, you gotta go see that guy. That guy is the guy you need to go see. So, that guy, the go-to guy, he rebuilt the Turbo 350. And I went on to win more than 2 track championships and a lot of races with that transmission in that car. But I had no idea what was really going on inside that transmission. I was racing out of state at Firebird Raceway when the transmission started to slip and act all kinds of funny. I pulled the dipstick and it was just full of glitter and chunks and everything under the sun. The fluid was burned to a very dark red. It was in really rough shape. The go-to guy that had rebuilt it the last time, he had passed away. So I had talked to a few other friends and saying, hey, what can we do? Hey, we build Turbo 350s. Let's go through yours and make it absolutely perfect so that way it won't cause you trouble nearly ever again. These guys had built some really wicked drag race Turbo 350s, so I knew I was in good hands. We started to pull the thing apart, and I'm watching parts come out, and I have no idea what's going on. But I knew exactly enough to see that when the clutches were starting to come out of the transmission, they didn't match. And I could see that there was a little bit more fighting with some of those circle clips and various other things in places. It just seemed like there was something weird going on. The further we go, I'm watching their looks go from, okay, this is just a rebuild, to, there's something really wrong here. After we got that thing tore apart, and by we, I mean they, I was just along for the ride, we came to the conclusion that the only 2 savable parts in that transmission was the tail shaft housing and the valve body. Everything else was cooked. Every hard part, the input shaft, the output shaft, the case itself was just absolute garbage. So the previous rebuild that I had from that guy turns out to have been a very sloppy rebuild with mismatched parts, poor clearances, terrible tolerances, and now I know why he was the go-to guy, and I now know why that transmission really didn't cost me that much money. So after the fact, after we determined there really was no savable parts on this thing, they went through their core pile and found all of the right parts to make this thing as good as can be without going too crazy and blowing the budget out of proportion. And I'll tell you something, the transmission that's in that car right now is about the absolute best Turbo 350 I've ever had. Let this be a lesson that the go-to guy may be cheap for a reason. So if you hear lots of people recommending the go-to guy, ask the question, is he good or is he cheap? I know it may not look like it, but my 1985 Buick Regal has been one of the most reliable cars I've ever owned. In my over 20 years of owning it, it's only ever had a couple of problems that left me stranded. One of those times it left me walking, it failed in a spectacular fashion. I was getting ready to come home from work, put my key in the ignition, turned it on, and it sounded like someone was trying to cut the block of that 3.8 Buick in half with a chainsaw and a hammer. Needless to say, I clicked that thing off as quickly as I possibly could, jumped out of the car, looked underneath, and I could see the starter dangling by the battery cable with a whole pile of aluminum shavings from that nose cone. Apparently the original starter from 1985, after more than 30 years, had just decided it was ready to break in half and destroy itself. Considering how many miles and years were on that starter, it served valiantly, and, that's one of those things. It's going to go bad eventually anyways, right? At the time, I had a very young family. My son was only a couple of months old at the time, and I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. It felt like most of my paycheck was going to baby formula and diapers. You know what I mean, right? So I looked around and I went to AutoZone and picked up the absolute cheapest starter that I possibly could for that car. And I proceeded to warranty that starter 5 different times. You're thinking, how many ways can a starter fail? Well, I had another one crack in half. I had the end casing fall off. I had the starter solenoid fall off the starter. And one let go in a fantastic shower of sparks when the solenoid went poof and put sparks all over the ground. And all of this was in a 90-day period because that's all that basic starter was warranted for. When I walked in with dead starter number 5, the manager looked at me and said, "This is day 85 of that warranty. Believe me, I have it on my calendar. We're not doing this anymore. I'll sell you the lifetime warranty starter at the difference between what you originally paid and what the lifetime warranty starter is, because we can't keep doing this. You're going to go broke doing this." One of those times someone was looking out for me. So, needless to say, I ponied up the extra money between the crappy Reman starter and the lifetime starter. That starter's still in the car, and that was almost 15 years ago. Let this be a lesson that just because the cheap part is available doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea. Messing with that cheap starter certainly wasn't the first, nor was it the last time I ever tried to mess with cheap parts. It's been said that the one who buys cheap buys often, and believe me, I've learned that on cheap stuff as well as expensive stuff. One of the things that I found out the hard way that I wouldn't have thought really would have been a thing: electrical components and the such. Oops, dropped one. I never would have thought that the quality would be such a huge difference. I mean, you see those switches that are light up and stuff at the AutoZone and O'Reilly, but you always see those light up switches. And I actually put a few on my El Camino thinking, hey, this is pretty cool. I can see that the circuit's on at a glance. But you know something? They never really felt good. They never actuated correctly. And it didn't take long before those switches were just an absolute mess and stopped functioning, and I had to go buy another one and another one. And then I realized, what the heck am I doing? I'm just going to go get a nice switch from a known electrical supplier. It's going to cost a couple bucks more, but you know something? I've still got a couple of those that I'm using today. Now, the interesting one is electrical connectors and stuff. Butt connectors, ring connectors, spade lug. Believe it or not, the cheap ones just don't crimp the same. And I bought a cheap crimp set trying to do electrical wiring on my El Camino and a couple other, cars and projects that I had. And I could never get them to crimp reliably, solidly. Every time the connection just came loose with very little effort. The spade lug, you'd push them onto something like a relay and they would just come loose like nothing. It's as if they were made out of rubber or paper or who knows. Insert something really cheap here. They never really held on. But I found that spending a couple more bucks to get a really nice assortment that includes things like heat shrink that isn't going to split the first time you heat it up really makes a big difference in how your wiring projects turn out. The other place I had to learn was hoses and fittings, specifically the AN hoses and fittings. This is PTFE. I've got some rubber AN lying around. But you know something? The cheap fittings and the cheap hoses, they never assemble very nicely, and they're going to fail typically right at that point where the hose ends and the fitting begins. They're just going to fail. Cheap hoses and cheap AN lines are just a recipe for disaster. And when you're putting it on the racetrack, you need those fluids to stay in place. You don't want them coming out and getting under the tires, oiling down the track for everyone else. That's a bad time. So spend a couple of extra bucks. Get the good AN hoses and fittings. I don't have any of those around because, frankly, I threw all my junk ones away so that way they never get used. Now, I'm not a tool snob by any means. My collection has Craftsman, both old and new, Cobalt, Husky, some of the AutoZone, O'Reilly branded tools, Harbor Freight. I've got more than a handful of those. But the thing is that you want to be able to at least look at the tool and determine if it's going to be halfway decent. And I know that's hard to do just looking at a tool, but you can probably get a pretty good idea if you look at the fit and finish and determine whether or not it's actually going to be any good. Now, I'm not a tool snob. Like I said, my power tools are skilled because they represent a very good value for what they are. Are they going to make as much torque as a Milwaukee? No, but I didn't spend Milwaukee prices on it. Some of these things, buying tools is a value decision. So don't buy the cheapest stuff. Buy the stuff that's going to work and make sense for you. The cheap stuff, it may get you home, but it may not do the job the way you want it to every time. Buying the cheap stuff may have you running back to the store for warranty stuff. How much time are you willing to waste to warranty out a tool that should have lasted from the first use? The bottom line, on a project like my El Camino or even my family hauler Yukon, I can't afford to be wrong, and if you're like me, you can't either. The cheap option in the beginning may save a couple of bucks, but you know something? It's usually more stress, more trouble, and ultimately costs more money down the road than if you had just bought the little bit better thing from the get-go. Learn from my mistakes. Buy once, cry once. Don't be the guy that buys cheap and buys off. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, check this one out over here. I'm sure you'll like that one too.